Before there was the Creaking, or even the Pale Garden, there was an old rule. Take only what you need and leave the rest behind. If you dare to challenge the forest, then beware, because the most dangerous things happen when you don't pay attention. For generations, the villagers built their homes in the woods, plains, and deserts that stretched across the land. But one place stood apart, the Great Dark Forest. Its trees towered, their canopies so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. It was a place marked in shadow. Yet the forest teemed with life. Frolicking animals thrived in its cool shade, and enormous mushrooms grew as tall as trees. The villagers saw this place as sacred, untouched, unchanged, and solely belonging to nature. But not everyone saw it that way. The Illagers, a clan of exiles, saw no beauty here, no sanctity. They sought to build their mansion in the forest. Its trees were merely obstacles to that goal, and obstacles were meant to be destroyed. Their leader, Marwood, gave the order.
Follow my lead.
He readied his axe and struck the first tree, sending it crashing to the ground. The other Illagers promptly followed. The mighty dark oaks groaned with every axe swing until they toppled lifelessly to the ground. The villagers watched in silence, completely appalled. But they were a peaceful people with no means to fight. What were they supposed to do? Suddenly, a voice of reason rose from the crowd. An old cleric stepped forward. Wise and unafraid, he approached the Illager leader and his son, Reedon. His warning was simple and his voice calm.
Disturb the balance of nature, and nature will retaliate.
Marwood stared for a second before laughing at the old man.
You are a fool, cleric. Trees do not think. And clearly, neither do you.
As the cleric turned to leave, Reedon stood alone, the old man's warning echoing in his mind. That night, the Illagers set up camp. While the rest of the Illagers celebrated a hard day's work, Marwood stood alone, basking in all that they'd accomplished. Below him, a massive field of tree stumps stretched beneath the moonlight. To Marwood, it was a glorious sight, and he was eager to continue their work in the morning. While his father plodded, Reedon noticed something strange. The stump of one of the trees was changing. The bark had turned gray, and pale moss had begun to grow. The tree was sick, and it was spreading. But his father didn't seem to notice, or at least, didn't seem to care. Marwood retired to his tent without a second thought. Yet Reedon couldn't shake a certain feeling. Should they have listened to the cleric's warning? The forest was quiet as the Illager army slept through the night. What they found when they awoke shocked the Illagers. The clearing had transformed. Gray moss stretched across the ground, smothering the grass and creeping onto nearby trees. The stumps from the day before were lifeless, piercingly white to their core. It was haunting. Reedon stepped back, stunned. He feared that the moss could be dangerous, but his father waved it off.
Moss grows on dead logs,
he said, brushing aside the boy's concern. His focus stayed unchanged, toward the future, a dream. He envisioned a grand woodland mansion, bigger than any structure the world had ever seen. Taller, stronger, built from the finest dark oak. Its construction would be a monumental feat, and every second spent worrying about moss was a second wasted.
Get back to work!
The Illagers hacked a path deeper into the forest, leaving a wake of wooden corpses behind. Pale moss crept ever closer to where they worked, moss draped in long, sickly strands from the dying branches. The infection was clearly spreading. A few Illagers hesitated. They glanced nervously at the pale, lifeless trees, somewhat confused and somewhat frightened.
Ignore them! Chop only the dark ones!
And so they did. As the axes fell, Reedon pleaded with his father. Why don't we replant some of the trees? We take so much from the forest. Why not give something back? His father spun to face him, startling the boy.
Don't be foolish, boy. Replanting these trees would double the time it takes to gather logs. Besides, once I've built my mansion, we won't need any more wood. Who cares if a few trees are dying?
He stormed away before the boy could respond. Quietly, Reedon bent down, retrieved some dark oak saplings from the forest floor, and planted them. If his father couldn't give back to the forest, then he'd do what little he could on his own. As he placed the saplings down, he noticed a small gray flower bud swaying in the breeze, growing near the pale moss. It wasn't like any flower Reedon had ever seen. The boy knelt closer. He wondered what this strange flower might look like when it finally bloomed. The sun sank lower in the sky as the day came to an end, but Marwood grew impatient. He rallied his troops, ordering them to continue their work into the night. The Illagers hesitated. Concern flickered on their faces. But the fear of disobeying their leader outweighed their unease, so they returned to the task at hand. Reedon couldn't help but to express his concern to his father. "Isn't it dangerous to be swinging axes in the dark?"
But not too dark to replant. Is that so? If you're going to outright disobey me, then you can return to the camp.
Reedon tried to argue, but his voice failed. It was hopeless. It became increasingly difficult to find any trees remaining that weren't infected. The pale moss had coated everything in sight. This slowed their pace, so Marwood made a decision.
Cut the pale ones as well, he commanded. They'll make for fine floorboards.
In the faint moonlight, the Illagers could barely make out the trees as they worked, struggling to place their axe swings in the dark. But what they eventually found was hard to miss, as one of the trees gave way into a large clearing. It was vast, its ground overtaken entirely by pale moss, and at the center stood a magnificent tree, taller than they'd ever seen before. It appeared to watch over them, its trunk wide and ancient. Embedded in its bark was something incredible, a glowing core pulsating with life. The Illagers stepped forward awestruck as hundreds of tiny flowers bloomed around them. Their buds unfurled, revealing glowing eyes within. If only Reedon was there to witness it. But the leader couldn't have cared less for the flowers, for he had his eye on the tree's core.
Perfect. What better trophy than the heart of the largest tree in the forest?
He muttered to himself. Marwood gripped his axe and brought it forward with all of his might, driving it deep into the glowing core. The sound of splintering wood reverberated through the forest. The tree howled, a deep, guttural sound that echoed for miles. The ground shook violently. Unfazed, the leader struck again. This time, the creaking sound came from every direction. Trees all around them swayed as if alive, and the earth trembled harder. He prepared one final swing. Suddenly, roots shot from the ground, startling Marwood, and before he could even react, they began wrapping themselves around him. The wooden vines were relentless, snaking around his arms, his legs, his torso. They pulled him closer to the glowing core, binding him to the great tree. The forest grew louder, the sound turning into a horrible wail. The other Illagers watched on in horror, before quickly turning to run from the scene, abandoning their leader. The roots twisted tighter, pulling him into the tree's bark. Quickly, his body began to change. Wood spread across his skin, fusing with his flesh. His limbs lengthened unnaturally, and his body bent at odd angles. His face distorted until glowing eyes the color of resin forced themselves open, one by one. His transformation was excruciating, but Marwood's screams were muffled by the roots around him. His body fell limp, fused to the tree. The Illager army burst into camp, mortified by what they'd witnessed. They were inconsolable. After learning of his father's demise, Reedon retreated to his tent alone, his heart heavy with anger and regret. He argued with his father just the day before, and the words still stung. The silence of the camp weighed on him that night, and he fell asleep in tears, wishing he could speak to his father one last time. Deep in the shadows, a wooden monster stirred, a complete distortion of who he used to be. As he tried to reach past the garden, the heart of the forest kept him from leaving. There was no use. His decisions were no longer his. The dark forest had reclaimed its debt. The next morning, as the other Illagers packed up camp, Reedon stayed behind. Quietly, he took discarded saplings and planted them to pale moss. One by one, he dotted the clearing with new life. The others did not join him. Fear of the forest had overtaken them, and they were frightened to stay any longer. Reedon crouched beside a sapling, watching it take to the soil. It's not much, but it's a start. He used bone meal to fertilize the saplings, and as they grew, the forest seemed to let out a sigh of relief, its aching dulling to a whisper. All the while, the Creaking watched from a distance. His glowing eyes lingered on the boy. It made no move to stop him, no sound to frighten him. It only watched, solemn and still, as his son did what he himself could not. With each new tree, the dark forest began to heal, and the gray moss disappeared. Still, at the center of the forest, the pale garden remained, its haunting beauty a reminder of what was lost. And that beauty would remain, as anyone who dared to challenge the forest again wouldn't be traveling alone.
And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?